Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Vitality Code podcast. Thanks for tuning in. We're really excited today to, we're bringing you a remote, look at this, the dedication, baby. We're remote in Charlotte, or part of our team is, that's me, remote in Charlotte, but we're not letting that keep us out of filming today. We're going to, oh, you know what? Look at this, baby. Jeff, look at this.
Oh,
Charlotte
geez.
Panthers. I'm ready for the game today, baby. Even though we're 1-6, it's ridiculous. But anyways, last time we talked about the role of sarcopenia, the scourge of sarcopenia, and we touched on some of the demographics, and we talked about the insidious nature of that disease process on metabolic health and overarching longevity and vitality. We were able to get Dr. Chester Sokolowski, CEO of Physique and exercise physiologist, on the show for an in-depth discussion of the basic science and what was going on behind the scenes inside the body, which was really fascinating and interesting to Dr. Farah, the other Dr. Farah, Jeff, and I. Jeff, that beard is looking good. That's on point too, by the way.
I appreciate it.
I'll give out the daily beard shot out. And we were able to get him back, and we wanted to talk a little bit about, now that we've kind of reviewed that basic science information, how do we move to the realm of applied clinical science? And again, just to recap, it couldn't be more important, right? We know that aging from a muscular standpoint begins as early as age 30. Testosterone starts to decline for sure by age 40, but there are some reports, and again, Jeff and I have seen it in our clinical practice as early as age 30. So there's an endocrine portion of this. There's a sarcopenic and muscular component specific that's a part of this. And we want to know, if we look ahead at the folks that we're treating that are in the fastest growing demographic, we talked about how can we kind of salvage their function and improve their lives, but also how can we as a younger cohort and even younger than us begin to maybe avoid those of our predecessors, and what steps can we take today to stave off that decline, secure aging, secure vitality, longevity for our futures. And that's where, we were able to get a great deal of information in terms of nutrition, exercise, and the pharmacological components with Dr. Sokolowski, but we didn't get a chance to get into his specific strategies, what you're doing, like, boots on the ground in the gym on a daily basis, and the proper way to train, and how that may affect adherence to training. So with that, I'd like to introduce Dr. Chester Sokolowski back to the podcast. Chester, welcome back. Thanks for joining us today. Appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me.
Tell us, what specific strategies should we be using to implement these, or what strategy should we implement in the gym and in our everyday life to kind of foster muscle hypertrophy and maintaining our muscle mass?
Okay, so to start with hypertrophy, it all centers around the quantity of weight you lift, or tension. Tension is the force your muscles generate. And tension is going to separate resistance training from the other modes of exercise. For example, you can walk on an incline treadmill and get some burn. It burns in your calves a little bit if you crank that treadmill higher and higher. But the burn is the pH of the muscle dropping, and the burn does not trigger growth. Additionally, you can generate oxidative stress in a number of different ways. You could smoke a cigarette and generate oxidative stress, but oxidative stress is not going to trigger growth. So the main thing that you have to shoot for when you're in the gym training is to lift heavy enough to challenge your skeletal muscles. You have to recruit, you have to engage your skeletal muscles, and then you have to strain your skeletal muscles with the force. We call it force-induced strain. And then your body, through a process called mechanotransduction, can perceive when you lift these weights, it can change the signaling inside of your skeletal muscle cells, and that is going to then allow you to adapt. It's going to trigger protein synthesis and a number of changes locally within the muscle cell and systemically within the body to allow you to get those positive adaptations to increase your power, increase your strength, and ultimately increase your muscle size. So it all centers around intensity, which is how heavy you lift. That's the most important thing out of any of your programming. And Jeff, I'm curious, we have a little bit different of styles. Sure. I do more of a bodybuilder style. You do more of a CrossFit style. What do you look for in the CrossFit realm as the key component to overload in that realm?
Yeah, I think I get questions. I get this question specifically, like why CrossFit? What, and some of that centered around not necessarily the topics that we're covering, but we have to take into consideration training adaptations, but we also have to take into consideration your trainers, your clientele, and things like that. But when we're in the gym, the first and foremost centerpiece that I tell people is we're looking for consistency. So that's our stop. Like maybe if we looked at a pyramid, that would be the bottom of our pyramids. We need to be consistent. After that, we track people, but we're looking across lots of different modalities, right? So we're looking across time for intensity. So we do some aerobic training. We also do strict muscular activity, and so we will track both of those. And so one of the good things about CrossFit, but also some of the knocks on CrossFit is we're doing lots of things at different times. And so we're trying to improve across aerobic capacity. We're trying to improve across muscular capacity. And we're also trying to improve across skill sets. So specifically like functionality, balance, coordination, accuracy. So we're trying to incorporate all of those things at once, and it can become complicated. So what we do as a gym is we sort of break those pillars down into specific measurable modalities, right? So we want to see aerobic capacity increase via a decreased time or the ability to maintain a certain intensity across time. We want to see strength increase. So we're looking at muscular adaptations across time as measured by strength. And then we want to see coordination, accuracy, and skill increase as defined by the ability to push movements at higher intensities and higher weights with good form and low rates of injury. So that's a very complicated way of saying it, but we sort of will measure lots of different concepts all at the same time.
I got you. Yeah, we were talking earlier before this podcast even began how similar bodybuilding, CrossFit, and powerlifting are in terms of what they strive to do. They're all attempting to increase strength over time. That is
Mm-hmm.
the number one way you're going to progress your overload. That's the number one indicator that you're getting better. You are adding contractile proteins within the skeletal muscle. You're adding proteins to those myofibrils, and that's going to allow you to lift heavier over time. And that's indicative that you're also overloading your body and doing great work is you're adding strength over time. Now, there's a little bit of difference between the CrossFit style in terms of how much they prioritize aerobic activity between CrossFit, bodybuilding, and powerlifting.
Yeah.
I believe all the population should do resistance training coupled with aerobic training. That's where you're going to get the best results, weights and cardio. But the emphasis on cardio is a little bit more in the CrossFit realm. If we have this spectrum, bodybuilding, it's a moderate emphasis on aerobic training. You sort of separate your resistance training and your cardio a little bit. And then powerlifting is definitely the highest emphasis on strength, but the lowest emphasis on aerobic training. But all the modalities, they're all similar in that you should be progressing strength over time. Your rest intervals are going to change. Your prioritization of the aerobic training capacity is going to change. But again, strength is the primary goal. And obviously, of course, what Jeff was saying, consistency is the primary goal. But then after you're hitting the gym on a regular routine basis, and it's a part of your lifestyle, it's part of your habitual behaviors, then strive to get stronger in the exercises that you repeatedly do and the rep ranges that you're going to consistently use.
Chester, I've got a question for you. I listening to you guys talk about this is really fascinating. One of the big things, and you guys are more the experts on this than me, but having read some literature and kind of experienced all three different worlds and being involved in CrossFit and just working out in the gym, and I guess I would call it a bodybuilder fashion. One of the things that always, and I remember when CrossFit kind of hit the scene, it probably introduced a lot of people to, I'm guessing this is my opinion, but to powerlifting that had not been before, because a lot of the movements that you do were powerlifting moves, snatches, clean. I mean, if you're a football player in high school, you're doing those. I mean, but other than that, if you're just if you had never purposely sought out those movements, you're familiar with things that are static, bench press, squat, right? And one of the things that struck me as unique with CrossFit was the powerlifting, and so the
Olympic lifting, snatch,
yeah,
clean, and jerk would be Olympic lifting.
what's that?
Olympic lifting, yeah, snatch, clean, and jerk.
Okay,
Those are
Olympic
Olympic
lifting.
lifts. Yeah, powerlifting would be squat, bench press,
Okay, I'm
and
glad. Okay,
deadlift.
thank you for that correction. So Olympic lifting specifically, and that there's a more of an I don't know I'll say it like I would think the common person on the street would say it is, there's more of an explosiveness in those movements, and so from an exercise physiologist standpoint, is there something that you're getting with am I saying this right? Olympic lifting rather than powerlifting, because it's such a dynamic process, and you have to generate so much. It seems to me you're generating so much power up front that you don't have that. You're not calling upon the muscles to act in an explosive manner in these more static um, bodybuilding type moves. So there's Olympic. Those were the like snatch and clean and things like that. And then what were the other definition, Jeff? What was the other category?
So your Olympic lifting would be your snatch, your clean, and your jerk, or clean and jerk, and then your power lifting would be your bench, deadlift, and squat.
Okay. And sometimes you combine them, right? Squat thrusters or different things.
Yeah, in CrossFit for sure. I think you're right. I think in CrossFit, most people that are new to CrossFit but have worked out before have not done Olympic lifts. They're
Right.
very rarely have you done a snatch. It's a very complex movement.
Cool,
Less common, but the clean. I think high school sports and sports in general tend to incorporate the clean because it's a little bit less perceived as a little less complex, and you can get that explosive hip motion and you can train that. And then the jerk, which is a variation for most people, although it's a completely separate lift in reality, it's a variation of like a shoulder press for a lot of people. So those two feel more similar and more familiar, but the snatch is very complex, powerful, dynamic motion. Yeah. So you're saying what's the juxtaposition maybe between a powerlifting and then the Olympic lifting?
Yeah, and but I would love to hear, like, Chester, what's your as an exercise physiologist, somebody who studied this at a very high level, and what the muscle's doing and what the result is. Because I would just tell you, as a consumer, as more of a basic consumer of it and doing it, it clearly feels a lot different, and I felt subsequently a lot different. Can you break that down as to what's going on there, and from your standpoint at least, and is there any benefit for the average folk, I guess?
Yeah, from the raw muscle side of things, they're a lot more similar than different. So we have different muscle fibers. We have type 1, which are your slow contractile fibers. If I were going to pick up a TV remote or something like that, I would rely on those fibers. I don't need a lot of force. I can maintain that force for a long time. That would be type 1 fibers. Then we have type 2A fibers, where they're a little bit more, they're called fast twitch. They're a little bit more explosive. They can generate more force. They're naturally a little bit bigger than these type 1 fibers.
Oh.
And then we have type 2X fibers, which are going to be used more so at the maximal strength or also very fast contractions. So when we do Olympic lifts, we're going to have rapid contractions of the skeletal muscle. Your snatch, your clean and jerk, your hang clean, all those different movements, they are rapid power movements, and they're going to have to rely on those fast twitch fibers, particularly those type 2X fibers. Similarly, when you do maximal strength movements, you're also going to rely heavily on those type 2X fibers. You're going to accrue all your muscles, but in particular, you're going to rely on those type 2X fibers. And they're fast fatigable fibers, meaning you can use them, you can generate high force for a very short period of time, but you cannot generate high force for a very long time. You can't do 10 reps with your extremely heavy weight, your 1 RM strength, because those type 2X fibers are going to fatigue relatively quickly. So both the Olympic lifting and the powerlifting, they're going to rely heavily on those type 2X fibers. And conveniently, for the average consumer, the average user, the type 2X and the type 2A fibers, those type 2 fibers, those fast twitch fibers, they're going to generate a lot of force. They're going to be able to contract rapidly. And amazingly, they're going to respond a little bit better than those type 1 fibers to hypertrophy. They're naturally a little bit bigger, and naturally they're going to be more sensitive to growth, let's say. So they're more sensitive to growth. They're naturally bigger. So they're going to give you a larger return on your investment, whether you're doing those strength movements, whether you're doing your CrossFit style powerlifting training. Both of those are fabulous ways to stimulate a similar fiber type, those type 2X fibers, just in different ways.
So each one, you're going to still stimulate those particular fibers.
Yeah, both of those movements. And those are going to be the fibers that are going to give you the best return on your investment, on your time investment, because they're going to produce hypertrophy more so than the slow twitch type 1 fibers. Now, there's differences in the mental side, the neural side. A massive component of strength is Jeff talked about coordination, your neuromuscular proficiency. Nerves, they have to get a signal from your brain, then they have to fire, and then that signal is going to go down, go in your arm, and then you can move your arm. So the technique, the neural side, that is a massive influencer on strength and a massive influencer on movement proficiency. And that is going to be much different between a maximal strength movement where you're moving relatively slow as compared to a supremely powerful clean and jerk Olympic style lifting, where you're also going to move a healthy amount of weight, but you have to do it extremely quickly. The way your nerves are going to fire, the way your muscles are going to coordinate, it's going to be a little bit different. And it's kind of interesting. You brought up the just how difficult those movements are to exercise, especially the snatch like that. I have an app and I'm demonstrating the 700 exercises, and I skipped over all the Olympic lifts because I'm not very good at doing those, and I'm not going
Snatch is tough, man.
to try to pretend I know how to do them because they are so technically difficult movements. I've known guys who are, 140 pounds and I'm 260, and they could just boat race me on Olympic lifting because the technique is just so pure with them. Whereas me, I'm just so clueless. Even though I have the muscle mass, I don't know how to move like that. But if you have the time to dedicate, if you enjoy the fast, explosive training, and you're down to get into the nitty gritty science of learning those movements, they have a tremendous reward, especially as you age, because we see these type 2X fibers that are highly responsive to strength and power, they start to atrophy in the older populations. If we touch back on the previous demonstration or the previous lecture, it's
and the mobility that you garner. I don't know. I always felt, Jeff, and you would be able to speak to this more because your clinic does this. And you've done it for a lot of years. You're certified, et cetera. But the mobility gains with CrossFit, and I know there's a lot of knocks. Again, I'm not, this is not an argument who's better, that kind of thing. But I will say, moving weight through a large range of motion, engaging different joints, different muscle groups. I don't know. I felt more. It was bizarre, but I felt more mobile. I just felt more functional.
Yeah, they are fairly dependent on mobility, especially like a snatch and even what seems to be a simple press like the jerk. You have to have this point of like really good range of motion, but really strong across that range of motion, which is sometimes a very inverse relationship. Chester, before we lose that train of thought, I wanted to talk. I was going to ask you, and you kind of alluded to it. As we age, which of those fibers is going first? Is it that 2X?
Yeah, the 2X. We have a pretty strong use it or lose it type of system in the body. And if we think about muscle from an evolutionary standpoint, we're built, let's say hunter-gatherer 500 years ago, we're living in a cave. We're built to store fat very easily. We can eat food. We could store that fat. It's good to have an energy depot. We don't want to starve to death in the hunter-gatherer society. But we don't want to hold a whole bunch of muscle. That's just more dead weight we have to carry around. If we're me being 260 pounds, that is not advantageous to live in the caveman era. I'm burning, we talked about how muscle burns calories before, but I'm having to burn way more calories. I'm having to expend way more energy if I have more muscle mass. Therefore, the body naturally doesn't really want to hold on to your muscle mass, particularly as you age. And we see atrophy of those type 2X fibers. And remember, those are the fibers that we're going to use when we're doing fast, explosive movements and generating a lot of force. Typically older adults, they're not doing as many fast explosive movements compared to when they were a kid, running and jumping around, and they're not generating those higher force. Therefore, we could see the type 2X fibers start to atrophy, and that's going to be where we start to see muscle mass decline, but also what declines even quicker in the advanced or the older populations of advanced age is the strength and power, and particularly the skeletal muscle power. Those fast movements relying on those fibers go in the tube, and then we could start to see those decrements, and then we see the functional and mobility issues.
So let's see if I can articulate this well. Let's say as I age, we'll just use me as an example. So I'm 45. As I move towards 65, are we likely to see my total strength decline first? Are we likely to see my capacity at a sub-maximal effort over time decrease first? Or is it likely a combination of both of those? Did that make sense the way I asked that?
Oh, yeah, it's likely a combination of both. I mean, the type 2X fibers, whenever you lift weights, you're not relying solely on one muscle fiber. Like if you lift really, some moderately heavy weight, you're going to use some type 1 fibers, some type 2A fibers, then maybe some type 2X fibers. We have a size principle of recruitment, where if we start off lifting light, we'll get our type 1. If we lift a little heavier, we'll get the type 2A. Then we lift a little heavier, we'll get those type 2X. So if you're experiencing atrophy in the type 2X fibers, you could see a reduction in total strength, as well as a reduction in strength across, maybe the 15-ish rep range, 10-ish rep range, just a gradual decline. The more important thing for older adults to try to preserve is that skeletal muscle power. Because when we see skeletal muscle power, when that starts to go in the tube, or in the tank, if you will, we start to see a reduction in your mobility. And then if that declines too much, we can get to the zone of disability. And we don't want to see that disability, because that's when you're going to be essentially functionally.
That's huge for the average population. Man, that was well said. And good question, Jeff, because, we know in my research, in the way it applies to me as a trauma surgeon and a general surgeon and things like that, and seeing folks that have falls and just impairment of activities of daily living and that functional disability you're talking about, it's a huge problem. And movement is medicine. Partnering with folks like Chester and Jeff in applying these concepts can make a massive change in your life, because we see the data is clear. The power falls faster in proportion than the muscle mass, especially now we're getting real. You said 65, Jeff, but after age 70, it's 20 to 40% per decade. So 70 to 80, 40% decline in your power. That's massive. That's so huge. No wonder these folks are coming in. I mean, you can imagine, not to mention, balance and coordination as well. So you're fighting on multiple fronts in that standpoint. So that was an excellent point there. And I would just want to say that from a clinical side, not just a functional. Well, the functional and clinical are you can't separate those, honestly. But I'm just saying we see that bear out to a massive degree on a epidemiologic scale that's important. So good point.
Yeah, I feel like I'm living out that Toby Keith song, right? I'm not as good as I once was, but I'm as good once as I ever was. Like
That's so true.
I can hang, I can hang with most of the younger population in the gym until we get to repeated bouts. Then I really start to feel like if we're doing, sets of 70 to 80% of a 1 RM for multiple sets, I'm good for the first couple minutes, hang with it, and then I feel it really start to drop. So as we look at these concepts, what would you say, Chester, is some of those basic principles of training? Like, let's talk about what intensity is ideal, what rep schemes, what volume, what frequency is ideal to make sure we're maintaining some of these things.
So it starts off with lifting challenging weight, and then we're going to just touch on intensity. I like that you can grow muscle at all these different rep ranges. The literature documents you can grow at, a few reps, you can grow at 25 reps. But for me personally, I like the 4 to 16 rep range. I think if you lift lower than that, it gets to be a little bit extremely strenuous on your joints to lift that heavy. And also mentally, we talk about the consistency element. If you're constantly pounding at the 1 to 3 rep range, it's going to be difficult to get up mentally for those sets and for your joints to get up. And joints, they do have a slower timeline of recovery because they don't have as much blood flow in those.
And you're assuming there, Chester, that in the 1 to 3 rep range, the weight's going to be extremely heavy, right?
Just for the I'm talking about really, really close to failure. You're not going to pick up something super light and just lift it 3 times when
right. So that makes that distinction
so much more. Yeah. So you're getting pretty close to failure. Maybe not at true failure, but relatively close to failure. The 1 to 3 rep range, it's going to just tax the mind and the body a lot. So I don't like to use that rep range too much. You can grow muscle with that rep range, and I do use that rep range, but it's very selective. It's very sparingly because I would just wear myself down over time. Additionally, I don't like extremely high reps because we talked about that burning sensation earlier. That would be indicative of hydrogen ions accumulating in your skeletal muscle and the pH of the muscle and localized area dropping. So you're going to start to feel a burn. That burn does not necessarily indicate muscle growth. Just because you have a burn, you're not going to experience an extreme rise of protein synthesis or anything like that. So if you start to do those very high repetition sets, 25, 30 reps, if you ever do those sets, they burn a lot. And I think with those sets, obviously they're going to burn, but that burn doesn't trigger growth, but you still have to recruit the muscle and then strain the muscle. That force-induced strain is key to trigger growth. But if it burns so bad, you might put the weight down and drop the weight before you get close to recruiting the muscle and straining all that muscle sufficiently. So I think gains, your process of stimulating protein synthesis with those really high reps, can be dependent on your pain threshold. How much burn can you take, or does it hurt too bad before you recruit and strain all your muscles? So I think.
Can I pause you right there then, Chester? So this is a question I had. So so we're talking about protein synthesis and adaptations to working out, and you said, the concept of not pushing those higher rep ranges because that burn and that hydrogen concentration doesn't necessarily produce those adaptations. Can an individual adapt to that? Can you have a physiological adaptation to that process that's going on to be able to withstand that longer? And maybe it's not ideal for although it may be for muscle growth. Is there some adaptation that can occur where you can achieve longer relative times at that acidic state?
I think in general, if it gets too acidic, physiologically, your muscles are not going to be able to function. But I do think that from a pain tolerance perspective, you can learn to tolerate the pain a little bit better mentally and then keep pushing. Some people enjoy, the no pain, no gain type thing.
Right.
And they're like supersetting everything and feeling the burn and feeling the pump and all that good stuff. So I think physiologically, if your pH gets too low, you're done. But mentally, there might be some adaptations that could say, okay, I've pushed this, I can push it a little bit further.
Right. So more of a mental adaptation than necessarily a physiological adaptation.
Well, I would say it depends, right? Just to give a corollary, as you know, and I've published on cardiovascular physiology as it relates to surgical states and things like that, and there is some correlation and overlap with the physical exercise. We often talk about in the ICU that people are literally running a marathon based on their cardiovascular physiology. And now this is from cardiovascular physiology only, but obviously involving the musculoskeletal system. If you, for instance, do moderate aerobic intensity, rather exercise, you will have a release. It's considered a antioxidant. Okay, so the liver's adaptation to that and other physiologic systems produces a net antioxidant effect, which is fantastic. Now, marathon running, on the other hand, is a net oxidative stress and tend to be a very catabolic and breaking down. Now, for sure, the mental power and maybe, the heart is very good at working with lactic acid because it has to. When you get down to a life or death situation and lactate's very high, you have to have something that's going to, the brain can work with it, the heart can work with it, but obviously we're not talking about those. But is there any parallel? I mean, are you going to hinder that growth and hypertrophy, or is it just not optimal?
So if you're doing like concomitant training where you're doing aerobic training and resistance training at the same time, if you want to be, there's sort of a spectrum. I don't think you're going to hinder growth significantly. But if you want to be the greatest strength athlete ever, you cannot be running marathons. And similarly, if you want to be the greatest marathon runner, you cannot be hauling around a lot of muscle because it's just going to make your life more difficult. It's going to be an uphill battle.
Let me pause you. I'm sorry. Let me clarify. What I mean to say is in pure cardiovascular exercise, there is a point where the intensity and pushing through the burns, so to speak, from a net oxidative stress standpoint is deleterious. If pushing through the burn and building up lactic acid, etc., and going beyond the pain threshold, if someone chooses to do that, is that net deleterious if you're just simply talking about strength training?
I think if you accumulate with strength training, we have this theory called overtraining, where essentially the body can only handle so much. You can only do so much. I don't think you're going to necessarily overtrain by one really, really strenuous set. But if you do a lot of those sets, then naturally you're going to do more work. And then with more work comes more potential muscle damage. And if you're doing set after set after set after set, then the total volume can get to a level where the adaptations are going to be more deleterious. It could be harder to grow the muscle because you're going to be tearing down a lot of muscle. The recovery process is going to be a lot longer. As well as the muscles, remember, they're always going to grow best when muscle damage is low. The protein that you eat is more likely to go towards growth. Excuse me, let me rephrase this. When muscle damage is low, the protein you eat is more likely to go towards growth, whereas muscle damage is high. We have a lot of existing broken down tissue. The protein you eat is more likely to go to repairing your existing mass. And the body sort of has this order of precedence. We do not add muscle unless we repair what we've already got. So if we have a whole bunch of muscle damage doing set after set after set, regardless of how much it burns or how heavy it is, the protein we eat is going to go towards repairing that existing mass rather than adding new mass. So it's not very advantageous to continue to kind of, I guess, see how tough you are and see how much you can take.
So there is an adaptation, I think, just as an outside observer listening to you guys talk, to me it occurs that there is an adaptation, Jeff. I don't know if this is some of the conclusion, but that adaptation is not something that anyone would want to use as a goal, perhaps, at least in this setting.
I was just wondering if there was like a improved buffering system, an improved ability to withstand acidic environments, that sort of adaptation that would occur.
There might be more ion transporters, but it's going to be, trivial in terms of the grand scheme of things making gains. I haven't, looked at, specific ion transporters when you expose the muscle to acidic conditions over and over again. But in general, that's not going to be like, yes, you're probably going to get maybe some adaptations locally within the muscle, but it's not going to drive a whole bunch of extra hypertrophy.
Sure. You definitely see it in other organ systems. Like there's ischemic preconditioning and things that can happen. But I think again, while there might be an adaptation, let's say that muscle, I don't know because this is not my realm, but this is Chester's realm and your realm. But if we say that these systems that we see in terms of alteration in blood flow and mirror ischemic preconditioning that we see in organ systems outside of muscle, of course, if they do mirror it, it's not something that you'd ever want to achieve as a person to improve your overall health, because fortunately we don't have to constantly be in a place where we have to be in a state that we could survive sepsis or survive shock, or
Right. So you're saying we're not trying to make the liver stronger by exposing it to these negative conditions, right? You're not trying to make the kidneys stronger by exposing
right,
them. So it's not like maybe like an overarching theme, like a hormetic stress, right? You expose the body to a small amount of a deleterious input to therefore increase its resilience to that on a grand scheme. But so I guess we're saying is that maybe that doesn't hold necessarily true for that acidic environment.
Yeah.
And then overall, we in terms of preconditioning to wounded or surgical states which cause injury and that kind of thing, we know that a conditioned patient does better. So I'm going to extrapolate that further and say, yeah, you're going to be harder to kill, quote unquote. There's a new book that came out, if you're doing this, but it sounds like, Chester, if I'm right, you don't, not only do you not need that, it may not even be the best way to produce greater gains and a more muscular functional body. Is that true?
Yeah, I like the phrase, and it sounds a little cheesy and cliche, but stimulate, do not obliterate your body. So you're not training for military combat or, flight, near-death situations when you're trying to change your body. You're just trying to change the skeletal muscle signaling within your skeletal muscle cells and systemic signaling within your body. And that's it. You're not trying to see how much you can take or how much you can tolerate. You just want to do a little bit more than what you previous did so you can adapt to that and make those positive adaptations. And again, you would be far better off if you kept muscle damage low, because you're going to have a good, healthy diet, good nutrition. We talked about high protein intake earlier, and those amino acids you eat, after you absorb them, they can go to repairing, hopefully, low existing damage, and then you can go add new mass. So I think the concept, we have like the old school movies where I was training 5 hours a day and like those things, like they're just outdated. They're archaic. They're not in the modern science. And in my old self, when I was in high school, I'd wake up and train at 3:30 a.m. and then go train after school. And I was training 4 or 5 hours a day, thinking that was the best way to do things. But now we learn to not necessarily have a whole bunch of sets, a whole bunch of, hours in the gym. Like, you just don't need that. Not only do you not need that, but it would probably be far more advantageous if you did not have that. If you didn't have such a strenuous, stressful stimulus in the gym, and you just did a little bit more than your previous best, and take that as a win and be satisfied with that. I also think it's pretty important to record your data, because you don't want to go in guessing. You want to know exactly what you did before, and you want to do just a little bit more. You don't need to PR by 40 pounds. Typically, when I was younger, I'd PR by I would get hyped up and emotionally driven exercise rather than data or strategic driven exercise. And I would set a PR by 40 pounds. The next month I'd be KO'd and just dropping weight every time, and I would go nowhere. So I think small adaptations, if you have your big compound lifts, maybe add 2.5 pounds to each side.
Eisen principle.
Yeah, something very small, and just be incredibly satisfied with that. And understand that is not just good, but it's probably ideal to get the fastest rate of change. It's those slow, steady gains where you're always in constant control of the weight. You're not destroying your body, so you could show up, you could remain consistent. And additionally, we haven't really touched on skeletal muscle is very fragile. So after you consume a meal, after you train, muscle can be damaged, and you can have membrane tears and ruptures. You want those amino acids and that glucose to go into the skeletal muscle. If your membrane, if you're, the casing that is surrounding the muscle cell, if that's all destroyed, it's going to be harder to take up those amino acids, to take up that glucose. And I've seen people with very high muscle damage, they run a marathon or something like that, they actually show signs of insulin resistance because they're not taking up the glucose into the skeletal muscle. Because the membrane is all torn open and such. So muscles do not grow best if nutrients cannot get in those muscles. So just doing a little bit rather than just obliterating your muscle, from a damage perspective, it's going to be better. From a nutrient uptake post-workout perspective, it's going to be better. So muscle's very sensitive. You don't need to essentially, again, see how tough you are every time you work out. You're not training for military readiness or sport readiness. You're just training to change your body. just a little bit.
Yeah, there is some beauty in pushing to those maximal efforts, right? There is some significant psychological benefits that can be achieved from that. But I think from a true training perspective, the need for those, and even from a adaptation mentally, if we're talking about that, I don't think it needs to be every single workout, right? I see this a lot of times. I know this is a random correlation, but I see this a lot of times with people getting exposed to the ice bath. And they're like, oh man, I'm up to 7 minutes a day. And I'm like, dear God, why are you doing that? They're like, oh, I thought we were just trying to get more and more. I was like, I think that's completely ridiculous. I usually do 1 to 2 minutes on my average routine. And then about once every 3 months, I'll just push it really far to reset my sort of mental capacity. And then I go back to 1 to 2 minutes a day. But the same thing, I think you see this, I imagine you see it in, like you said, in the bodybuilding and the Olympic lifting. And we see it in the CrossFit is, can I work out 2 a days? Can I go 110% every workout? Can I do maximal effort? And while I love the beauty of the suffering and the mental adaptations that happens during an intense workout, I think if you're looking at it from a physiological muscle growth, it's silly and it's not necessarily. It needs to be more specific, like you said, and a little bit more focused to get those adaptations.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'd say it's strategic and focused. And then also be content that and understand that you can change the physiology within your muscle cells with just one set. So one very high quality set is all you need to change the signaling side of your muscle cells for 24 hours, potentially even longer, depending how amazing that set is. So just doing a few sets. Me personally, I only do 1 to 4 sets per week on every muscle group, which is not a
Oh,
lot of.
wow.
Yeah, I say that and people go, what? So we just had one study that they did 52 sets per week. And I just told you I did 1 to 4 sets. So I don't do a lot of volume, but I make it count. I go into the sets really warmed up, making sure I'm ready to perform my best. And I do push it. I do strain. And I do a drop set to finish it. So I'll go to a load of heavier weight. Remember, stimulate those type 2X fibers, those type 2A fibers, and then I reach fatigue with that weight. Then I'll reduce the weight immediately and then maybe hit those type 1 fibers. And sometimes one set is all I need to trigger positive adaptations. And I do push it within that set. I do definitely train outside of your comfort zone. You don't grow inside of your comfort zone. But I'm not doing set after set after set, seeing just how much I can tolerate and how much I can take, because I know that's not going to be advantageous from a muscle damage perspective, and also in terms of getting nutrients into the body post-workout, into the muscle cells specifically post-workout. So just be content and understand that less can be more, and prioritize quality over quantity in the movements that you do. And I feel like you're going to get much better adaptations with that approach.
That's going to help with the whole issue of adherence too, because if people say, oh, look at this. I mean, I think as practitioners of and scientists in, and people that are fostering this in for instance, even in this podcast, like, remember, to the average population, unless you're trained for something specific or you're seeking that stoic release or that stoic experience, and I agree, there is definitely a mental benefit, but outside of that, you don't need to be afraid to do these exercises because you think that because everybody's doing this, or whatever your experience is, that you see, oh, I've got to do this too, because it's way too hard, I'll never be able to do this. No, that's not. They shouldn't. Whatever you're seeing does not line up with the science. If you want to become better and have the benefits of it, turns out a more moderate or kind of deliberate, consistent, reasonable approach works very well. Would you agree, Chester?
Oh yeah, and I think going at the mental side of this is huge. I used to look at my old workouts, 10 years ago, and I would do 4 sets of everything, 3 sets of everything. If you've ever done 4 sets of barbell back squats, like, it's daunting. I used to just get so nervous on leg day. I used to feel like I was going to throw up because I was going to use extremely heavy weight that could, potentially crush me, and I had to do 4 sets of it, and it was just mentally taxing. Even for someone who loves the fitness lifestyle and loves this arduous, strenuous strain in the gym. But if you taper that volume down, and I'm not anti-volume by any means, but I'm just do a moderate amount that you can trigger gains, mentally you're satisfied with it, and then again you're logging your data and you're seeing strength progress at a consistent rate. If your strength is plateauing, that might be indicative that you are overtraining. So just do a tolerable amount of volume, and do not think I got to do one more set. I would much rather you do a finite amount of sets, like, okay, I'm going to cap it, 3 sets, that's all I get. And then within that 3 sets, I'm going to push myself as much as I can, and sort of, again, making these sets count from a quality perspective. And that's also going to be much better in terms of adding set after set after set. You might not get any more adaptation, but if you are prolonging your sets, you're making your muscles work longer, you're recruiting and engaging more muscle, as you hit that sort of moderate amount of fatigue, I think that that's going to be far more advantageous to see more gain. So I always talk to people who train with extremely high volume, and I say, hey, cut your volume down by half, and then just see, and this is from a bodybuilding perspective, not a CrossFit perspective, and just see if you can push it. Let's say you're always doing 10 sets. We'll only do 5, and then see how much better you are if you're only doing 5, how much more mentally you are engaged, and how much more you're willing to work, knowing that you don't have to do so much work. You're not going to be saving yourself as much every single set. And you don't have to train to failure, but you're just going to be amply warmed up. You're going to give it your very best on the quantity of work you do. And it might be a little bit smaller. It might be a finite amount, more limited than what you're used to. But I guarantee your body's going to respond, and mentally it's going to be easier to push outside of the comfort zone, knowing you don't have to do so much work.
And that was cool, Jeff. I don't think back to, Jeff and I there was times we were overlapping in undergrad, and we would work out together and things. And I'm just thinking about the general mentality through the years. It's interesting to hear you say that if you plateau, maybe you're overtraining, and you're trying to do much. I think if I plateaued, especially back in a anachronistic way of old time, workout or bro science, or what I perceived as was bro science, was I'd say, oh, well, clearly I'm not doing enough weight. I have to train more. I mean, I don't know. Do you see that, Jeff, as a way that people think sometimes, or you used to think, or did you know early on that if you were plateauing, oh, I got to do less to get more?
I don't think I ever had the front of mind awareness to even think that I was just doing what I was told when I was training, right? You just did, and I was playing sports, and you never really questioned any of that kind of stuff. And I never really would have dove this deep into these concepts. I think my thought on this is that bottom part is the first and foremost, right? If they're not coming consistent, it's hard to overtrain. And so I think we're trying to balance and speak to maybe 2 different populations, because some of these people who are training consistently are overtraining, but then some of the people who aren't coming consistent are just not training enough. And so I think that takes that's why sometimes it's better to have somebody guide you who has a 30,000 foot view. It's like, well, you only came twice this month, so you're not overtraining, my man. Like, let's be honest here, versus I see this a lot sometimes in a certain subset who overtrain is they'll come to the gym, to a CrossFit workout 6 days a week, and they're trying to go 110% every workout. Where when I was training consistently at CrossFit, I do a lot of different things now. But when I was coming 5 to 6 days a week to the CrossFit gym, I would do 1, maybe 2 hard, quote unquote, 110% days. But I would come each day and I would just train technique. I would train just my body getting up out of bed and train that mental side of it. I would come and do mobility. I would train technique and things like that. And then based on my other training schedules, I would pick 1 day a week, whatever the workout is, that's the day I was going 110%. And I think some new people, that's sometimes hard for them in the CrossFit world, because it looks like you're supposed to go 100% every single day, when in reality, that's not probably very advantageous. And it just breaks you down in the long run.
Yeah.
I like how you mentioned, getting people to look at you over 30,000 feet. I feel like that is a massive challenge to program adherence, is when people don't see results, and we live in a society where the results are instant. You go on the internet, you search for something, you find it immediately. Whatever it is, you can get it seemingly immediately. When you do not get results, and it's hard to change your body, it's not a day-to-day process, it's a weekly process, a potentially monthly process or yearly process. It can be frustrating if you do not see those results. So getting someone to eyeball you with the credentials, with the education, with the experiential knowledge is very important in this game of changing your body. That can be so advantageous, because 1, they're going to be in your corner in terms of accountability, but they also know what they're doing to put you in a position to give you those results so you see the positive changes faster, and then an object in motion stays in motion. You're going to see the results and you're going to want more. And that's going to help the fire grow. It's going to help with the consistency. So surrounding yourself with an environment of supportive people, but also educated people who know what to do, know from an intensity perspective, from a volume perspective, from a frequency perspective. Again, they're going to put you in the right position so you can experience success. I feel like that's absolutely paramount. One of my friends asked me when I was younger, what would you do different about your training program? And I was like, a cocky 21-year-old kid. I just made a couple of A's in exercise science. And I said nothing. If there was anything different, I would immediately do it. And she just looked at me like it was the stupidest answer. And looking back now, that was the stupidest answer. You have to admit you don't know what you don't know. So that can be hard. It can be a little bit of blow to your ego. But if you get people who are more educated than you, if that's your surrounding circle, and they're going to look at you from a subjective and an objective standpoint, that's going to work in your favor. So giving the correct ecosystem full of scholarly individuals, that's going to facilitate your progress so much. And if you're struggling to see those results, they're going to put you on the path where you can experience and see those results faster.
Yeah, I agree 100%, Chester. I think, and there's so much more that can come from a oversight, right? You can be pushed when you're low. You can be pulled back when you're going too hard. There's program adherence, and sometimes you may have the knowledge up here, but that doesn't necessarily mean I'm going to execute on it because I get wrapped up in the emotion of it. You see this sometimes in business, and you can be a really strong business person, but you may still need a business coach, right? Because you still make emotional decisions. You're like, I hired this new employee, and like, well, did you go through the steps that we talked about? No, they were a friend of mine, so I hired them. And so, you can see this across different activities. I wanted to, as we start to get close to the end here, I wanted to talk though, like if I was I don't know, a moderately in shape person, had no injuries, working out in the gym semi regularly, is there an ideal frequency and volume that seems to be maybe the most widespread that you would get? We know we want to be, those sets need to be intense for muscular adaptation, but is there an ideal volume and frequency that we should be hitting the gym, so to speak, or exercise in general?
So we'll start with volume. They did a study where they were looking at training volume in various men. And after 20 total sets per week, they actually did not see any increase in muscle mass. They saw all those gains were essentially inflammation driven. Again, post-workout, there's swelling. There's an inflammatory process where you have to repair.
My pump.
Well, it's a little different than pump. The post-workout edema.
There's no sweat edema, not pump.
Yeah. So not the intra workout. Not everyone loves the pump intra workout, but the post.
So you're talking about post workout. Okay.
Yeah, post workout, the inflammatory process. After 20 sets, they found that gains stagnated, and gains in terms of contractile protein increases, they stagnated. And the only thing that was driving the muscle bigger was the muscle was getting more swelling. It was getting more inflamed, more edema, driven by that inflammatory process. So 20 sets might be the cap in terms of a high end.
Say that more specifically. 20 sets of a particular body type per muscle group?
Per muscle. So if you're going to hit your quads, you're going to do some squats and some leg press and some quad extensions. 20 sets might be, okay, this is kind of all the body can tolerate. Now, me personally, my body can only tolerate 1 to 4 sets. So there's going to be some highly variable differences between individuals, and your lifestyle is going to influence that. Your training aggression, how close you train to failure, your rest intervals, your readiness.
Do you think your because I would say, would you agree that maybe obviously compared to the general population, you're a seasoned lifter, so you're maybe able to push that intensity and your specificity is much more, so maybe your volume, because your quality is higher, your volume is maybe smaller?
I like to think volume has this sort of U shape. So if you're in the very beginning shape or very beginning stages of lifting weights, your muscle damage is naturally going to be higher. You have not developed a protective effect. So I like to start beginners off with just like 1 or 2 sets, like nothing crazy. And then as they get more intermediate, then the volume can trickle up. And then you might get close to that 20 set per week, 15 set per week, 10 set per week, something like that. And then as you get more and more experience, I feel like your volume tends to go down a little bit.
I think that's a great analogy.
You know your body, you're training aggressive, you're warmed up perfectly. There's just this innate sense that you have, or this, it's not innate, but rather a learned sense that you have, because you're just so familiar with how your body operates and what you can tolerate. And obviously you're tracking progress and recording your strength. So I feel like volume is going to start low, a couple sets a week, then it might trickle up 10, 15, 20 sets a week, and then it might gradually go back down the more seasoned you get. And this
Very
is
good.
the more seasoned you get, I mean years and years.
Right? Yeah, it's
And in
not
terms
weeks.
of frequency, we can touch on this before we conclude. They did a study where they looked at, the bro split, like chest is Monday, biceps is Tuesday, skip calves on Wednesday, that type of thing. They, they found that training a muscle more than once a week could be advantageous, meaning training like, let's say you're going to do your quads, like we talked about doing 10 sets a week or something, splitting them up 5 sets on Monday, 5 sets on Friday. That might be a little bit better than just dumping everything on Monday. So training a muscle more than once per week, and this is each muscle, not necessarily like, okay, just train once total body, but train a muscle more than once a week could be advantageous for gains.
What would you say, maybe taking some of the concepts that you know about this specificity, say you're doing more of a CrossFit-esque style or functional fitness or HIIT style, where it tends to be the whole body and aerobic and muscular at the same time. How would you take that sort of volume and intensity and frequency adaptations? Is that like how, if you're doing squats every single day to some degree, because it may be squat cleans, it may be thrusters, and then it may be true squats at the end of the week. Is there a way to extrapolate that? You just have to be much more diligent in your record keeping, I suppose.
It's more difficult, but a lot of the times when the research looks at is total weekly volume. So we talked about 10 sets or 15 sets or 20 sets being a weekly landmark. A bodybuilder might do 5 sets on Monday and 5 sets on Friday, whereas someone in the CrossFit realm, maybe 2 sets, 3 sets, 3 sets. And
Gotcha.
at the end of the week, it's pretty much the same net effect. And across the literature, that's it's going to be a total weekly volume is a big driver in the more moderately trained. Now, if you're, again, super, super highly specific, trying to be the very best at a specific technique, then you might not want to do everything every single day and let your body recover. But if you're trying to see those general gains, those general adaptations, get rapid adaptations, as CrossFit does, because it combines aerobic training with resistance training so very well, then again, total weekly volume is going to be a pretty good proximity in terms of, okay, like here's a landmark, and it doesn't matter how you distribute that as long as you hit the same net effect within that week.
Cool. Interesting. I like that. Yeah. So I think CrossFit does a good job. I like it for me specifically for my mindset. I'd like a really good generalist, because I just get bored in the gym and I don't have that long-term outlook of training my squat. And, like you said, at the end of that curve, you may be putting 2.5s on there after a long, I don't know, several weeks and months and maybe a year of work just to gain 5 pounds in your max. And that's like, to me, that's just really hard to do. So I, as a individual, just skew towards that generalist, like just sort of getting better at everything all at once seems to suit my mindset a little bit better.
Oh yeah, I think the return on investment, if you have an hour to burn, I think CrossFit, or an hour to invest, not hour to burn, but hour to invest in your health and wellness, I think CrossFit is absolutely fabulous, because you're going to combine aerobic training or resistance training unlike you're going to get with the bodybuilding or powerlifting style.
Or even straight cardio. I mean, you can't train for a marathon and just, you got 1 hour. It's like, it might be long run day, and you might just have to, or even cycling, right? You might have to put in a couple hours in the saddle just to be able to do that. And that sometimes, I think we said, if you have that hour, that's one of the things I like most about CrossFit, is that you can combine a lot within an hour, get in, get out, and get on with your day.
Yeah.
Chester, how do you know your program's working? What are you as an exercise physiologist, or what do you suggest as an exercise physiologist that people use? Is it something that we see in the mirror? Is it the strength on the bench press? What do you use?
I think the gold standard to assess progress is strength. That is the indicator that you are adding contractile proteins to your skeletal muscle. And the contractile proteins, they're going to occupy the majority of the volume within the skeletal muscle. So your strength progress, if your strength is going nowhere, you might be overtraining, or you might not be hitting the gym enough in terms of consistency. Hey, I've only gone to the gym 2 times this month and my strength is going nowhere. Well, yeah, you got to be a little bit more consistent than that. So strength progress, that's the number one way. Okay, am I being consistent? If that's checked and you're showing up routinely, if your strength is stagnated for weeks and weeks and weeks, potentially months, and you're not in a calorie deficit and you're sleeping enough, then you might be overtraining. Next, I also like to look at body measurements. I like to take body measurements every week or two, and you're going to get a tape measure and wrap them around your various areas, your chest, your arms, your butt, your waist, things like that. You have to be relatively consistent with these body measurements, and I like to take them at the same time of day. You have to be consistent because how you wrap the tape measure could vary a little bit. If you're off, a little bit miscentered, misaligned, that's going to throw off your body measurement. And you have to be consistent in the timing in which you take these as well, because you don't want to wake up super dehydrated. I just water vapor. I was breathing all night. I woke up lighter, have my little abs. You don't want to take your body measurements at that time, and then the next time you take them, it's post Thanksgiving meal and your waist is looking gigantic. You want to be a little bit consistent with the timing of those body measurements. So I say strength, body measurements, and then I also like to do progress pictures. So every 2 weeks or so, I put my camera on record and I do a little video and I do my little flexes and whatnot, side angles, front angles, back angles. And I just take screenshots of those and I monitor how my body's changing. And then lastly, how your clothes are fitting. That's also another win. You might not see it, and the progress pics might take a little bit longer. The body measurements could be a little bit stagnated. But hey, if you're filling out jeans more in the glutes, and that's your goal to have a bigger butt, or you're a little bit slimmer in the waist, you want to taper that hourglass physique, your clothes are not going to lie to you. So that's another great indicator. So there's multiple ways. You have your strength, you have your body measurements, you have your progress pics, and then how your clothes are fitting. Those are 4 great ways to assess progress.
I like it.
Those are probably things that a really good personal trainer and or coach should be doing for you.
Oh,
right? I mean, I'm just going to tell you, I would not do that. If you sound like you're a much more analytical, much more detailed kind of person in that regard. That would be overwhelming for me. But if I walked into my trainer and he was like, "Hey, it's time for your body measurements. Let's see what those biceps and your and your thighs and see how they're doing. We have your progress pics from last month. I'm going to update those, and then over a year you can kind of look at those." That would be such a huge component to a successful training program, because also for me, I would probably more likely adhere to the other advice, right? I'd probably more likely adhere to my sleep, my nutrition, my training regimens, because I know pictures are going to be done and they're not going to lie. And I know my measurements will be done. And I know he's recording my strength, not like, "Oh, that was a really good set. I think we did a little more than that last time. That's cool." Or "Your time's getting better." You actually have this data trove that you can go back to. I think that's a good thing for coaches and trainers to kind of incorporate into their regimens for their clients.
What I'm seeing is that you outsource those types of things to the experts. You outsource it to a Dr. Sokolowski, to Dr. Farah, or whatever. You're looking for those. If you're going to avail yourself of these services, you're looking for a place you can do that. Outsource it. Don't try to do it yourself. Don't even have the expectation if that's not your thing. Outsource it, and then you're going to see results. So number one, outsource it, and then prioritize your health in a way that first you got to prioritize your health in a way that allows you to outsource it, and let them track it and let them guide you. Don't have to be the expert on everything, and you'll get the results. Will be the return on investment is huge when you do that. It sounds like, because that's what I'm hearing, kind of as a more of the consumer end of things.
Yeah, everyone loves to be evidence based, and they'll go on PubMed and they'll look at all the evidence on PubMed, but then when it comes down to the actual evidence about their body, they won't gather any data or any information.
Right.
Like, how are you evidence-based when you're not collecting evidence on yourself? Like, you're the one that you're trying to change. Like, that is so important.
That's a good one. So why do people stop, Chester? Just to kind of wrap this up, so we can kind of get some pearls here, or some insights to maybe make us or understand what's going on, and then how we can avoid those things, or
in terms
change
of
them.
pitfalls.
Yeah, pitfalls and things like that. Adherence. Why are there program adherence challenges?
I think, obviously, if you don't see results, you're going to get frustrated. If you do something and you're good at it and you're seeing these positive changes, you're going to keep wanting to be good at it. So I think setting yourself up with a program, and again, you could consult, get some experts to set you up with a program that's going to give you those results, that's going to increase your strength, that's going to decrease your waistline, it's going to increase your quad measurements if you want to build your thighs, things like that. Also, again, Jeff talked about it. It's all about consistency in terms of the nutrition, the sleep, and also training and showing up. I feel like we're in a social media era where everyone wants to entertain you and offer this workout and this secret and this little gimmick. And the only thing that really does is kind of derail consistency. And remember, a lot of they have use my supplement code, discount, Booty Cheeks 10 for 10% off of this product.
I love that code. That code works every time.
They got me. Booty Cheeks 10, baby.
Booty Cheeks, they're just trying to entertain you with that Booty Cheeks 10.
Yeah.
They're not necessarily trying to give you the best results so you can progress at the fastest rate. They want to do catchy stuff to get your attention. Like, let's take squats, for example. Nobody likes to squat. Like, there's nothing about a deep squat when you're kind of getting that ass to grass that you like. That's not enjoyable to anyone. So if you could find a way to get out of that in some catchy, creative way, you're going to be entertained. You're going to be open to that idea. And I feel like dodging the hard work with this excessive variety, with this over bombardment of information, which is going to derail your progress. It's going to be harder to track your strength if you're switching up your exercises every workout and such. I just feel ultimately overstimulating your body with too much information, with not sticking to a system, that's going to be more disadvantageous than advantageous, and could derail the goals, could derail seeing that progress. And then you're going to get frustrated, then you're going to stop.
Yeah. Good point.
Very good. Well, docs, I appreciate your time. That was a good one. I think we could talk on that for a while, but that was some really good pearls in there. I'm going to talk to my trainer on Monday and start getting some picks going. So
Yeah.
I'm going to get some measurements.
Can we meet back in a month and we can all talk about our measurements?
Yes.
Our biceps?
We should do that. We should do that. I mean, honestly.
I'm not measuring. I'm not comparing my biceps to Chester's. Are you kidding me?
Well, yeah. We have to have a certain who are you going to compare it against exactly? Well, hold on. It should be. Here's what it should be. It should be your old self, right? I mean, in all
Sure.
side, right? It should be. So, yeah. Chester, how are you facilitating that with just, lastly, I know you've done a lot of work with this with Physique U and your application as well. How are you doing this in those settings, and how can people avail themselves of them to again, find that one-stop shop and a trusted source and someone's going to have your best in mind? Is that something that you do with those programs?
Yeah. My app has a place where you can store progress pictures. All the information is confidential. Only you can see it. You can take body measurements. You can upload them whenever you want. You can see your pictures next to your body measurements. You can also see your progress pictures next to your training volume. So you could say, hey, I'm training, I'm looking at my photos and I'm looking really good here. And I'm doing this amount of training volume. Then you could take some more pics and, you have your consistency with nutrition, and you could take these pictures and look at your training volume here, and maybe you increased volume or decreased volume. You say, whoa, I don't look as good at that higher volume or lower volume, and therefore you sort of get this mindset of, okay, this is the formula that's going to help me look my best. I look my best when I'm doing this amount of training volume and getting this many steps, and I know it's working because my body measurements are going like this, my waist is going like that. You're seeing all these different positive adaptations. It's just Physique Lab is called the app, and it's just a one-stop shop where you can just record your entire fitness lifestyle. You can record and organize your fitness lifestyle, and then within the coming months, we're also going to have training programs on the app where you essentially have workouts that you can follow every single exercise, every single workout. You're going to have detailed instructions on how to execute it, and it's also going to have those video recordings so you know how to execute the movements properly. I might have to get Jeff to demonstrate some of the Olympic lifts because suspect on that. Besides that, it's going to be good to go.
That's the era we're in now. It's taking the medical science, the basic science, and then personalizing it, right?
Yes.
And that's pretty cool. I didn't realize it was to that degree. So that's fantastic. We'll have to check that out. Well, thanks, guys. We'll have to have Chester back on. Invariably, we're going to need his expertise as we move along here with these different topics. So look forward to that, and look forward to checking out your stuff. Jeff, anything?
No, I'm good. Thanks, guys. Appreciate your time.
All right. We'll see you next time. Thanks a lot, Dr. Sokolowski.
Thank you.